Hi people, it's me Anja, my pronouns all she and her, and welcome back to my channel for a new recent reads video. But before we get into the books, I just wanted to quickly shout out my friend Emmy, who has created a database on Notion for specifically LGBT plus books. And I've been submitting submissions to this database literally all day. I love promoting queer books, obviously, and I think it's so important to have collections of queer books. So I would definitely highly recommend checking out the database itself, but also submitting your favorite queer books to the database. You just have to provide like basic information like the author's pronouns, the representation involved in it, obviously, and the Goodreads link. So anyway, with that said, I will be linking down below Emmy's database as well as the link to submit books as well, especially for queer authors, but also for readers as well. So anyway, with that said, please go check it out if you want more queer book recommendations or if you want to submit a book yourself. So anyway, there's that. Emmy didn't ask me to do this, I just wanted to. So yeah, anyway, January has started off to be a very solid reading month. I think I've read 24 books so far, which is quite awesome because with all of the recent news, I haven't really had the headspace to truly escape into reading because of everything that's going on. You know what I mean? So yeah, with that said, also, fuck ICE, free Palestine. Like, that's my stance and it has always been my stance. So anyway, without any further ado, the first book on this list is called A Wild Radiance. This book is my first 5-star of the year, and it's a YA fantasy following a queer main character who's been banished to a remote village, and basically it's because like she can't seem to control her electrical magic, which is so fascinating as a concept itself. And basically this fantasy is set in a society that is based off of, I think, the Industrial Revolution, but it's not technically a historical fantasy. But anyway, basically, she starts to uncover corruption and she starts to resist systematic oppression, which I love. I love it when fantasy stories really tap into like stuff like that because it really like parallels with real life, especially now. I thought this book was excellent. I loved the world building and the setting and the magic and the polyamory and the queerness and the characters and everything. This book is so good and it reminded me of Fire Becomes Her, which is one of my favorite YA queer historical fantasies that I read a few years ago. I think this book is so excellent and it's so brilliant and it's so well written. I had really high expectations for this book because of what I've read previously by this author, and now I want to go back and read their debut book, which I initially DNF'd. But anyway, this book was excellent and it was so good and I really enjoyed every single aspect of it. So anyway, with that said, I rated this book 5 stars and I would definitely highly recommend it. The next book on this list is called Worst Case Scenario, because naturally after rating a book 5 stars, the next book I read afterwards I rated 3 stars. This is the second book so far that I've read by this author that I've rated 3 stars, because they've also written 2 other books that I've rated, one of which 5 stars and the other one 4 stars. Basically, I had higher expectations for this book and it disappointed me ultimately. For those who don't know, this book is a YA contemporary following a non-binary main character who is forced to share the presidency of their high school's queer alliance club with their nemesis. And I personally didn't really like this book because even though I loved the queerness and the anxiety representation and the romance and the friendships, I felt like the ending felt very sudden. And I think because of the fact that their romance started because of like the club, I thought that the club would be more incorporated into the plot. So the ending kind of felt like I wanted more from what was happening in the club, if that makes any sense. I don't know. This book ultimately felt a little bit underdeveloped in some aspects, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I rated this book 3 stars because ultimately it disappointed me. So with that said, I don't recommend it. So there's that. The next book in this video is called The Roommate Arrangement. This book is a YA contemporary following a young college student who's a freshman, and she is forced to find new summer housing. So last minute, she moves in with her brother's best friend, and also like 4 other people. But basically, she and her brother's best friend have always kind of had like an enemies relationship, in the sense that they've never been close. So basically, this is a bad idea, but it's the only idea that she has, because otherwise she doesn't have a place to stay. Anyway, all that to say, this book was so good, and it was so well done. I knew immediately that I would love it, which is why I think this book was on my January TBR. Anyway, it was so good and so well done. I've read Samantha's previous YA college book, which was called Love Off the Record, I think, and featured a similar, like, enemies to lovers romance, and that was so good. And I would say, personally, if I had to choose, I would prefer Love Off the Record, but this book was so good, and it was so well done. I loved the characters, the family dynamics, the romance, the friendships, everything. Like, this book is so fantastic, and the romance had me cheesing. Like, it's so giddy, it's so good. I loved the main character's relationship with her parents and her brother and everything. Like, this book is so excellent, and I just really, really enjoyed it so much. Anyway, with that said, I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely highly, highly recommend it. The next book on this list is called Winter White. This story is a YA contemporary retelling of The Winter's Tale, which I've heard is an original Shakespeare story, which I've never heard of before, but obviously it makes sense that Shakespeare has written other things besides Romeo and Juliet, Twelfth Night, and Hamlet. You know what I mean? Anyway, all that to say, basically this story follows a young main character who starts to discover things outside of this sheltered, isolated environment that she has always been in. And I just really appreciated, first of all, the depictions of addiction and abuse. Like, everything was portrayed so realistically. Second of all, I loved like her relationship with her younger brother, as well as her new romance. Like, everything was so good and so well done. The characters and the pacing and the plot and the writing and everything was done so well, and I was so intrigued every single second of the way. Like, this book is so good and it's so underrated. So anyway, with that said, I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely highly, highly recommend it. The next book on this list is called Love Makes Mochi. This story is a YA contemporary following a young Asian lesbian who is traveling abroad in Tokyo for a fashion internship, and basically she meets somebody who changes her perspective on love. And for those who don't know, this book is the 3rd book in this love and translation series, where basically different authors write about different characters who travel abroad and find love abroad. But technically all these books are companion novels, because all the main characters are best friends, but you can read all of the books as standalones. So for me, for example, I read the series out of order because this book is the 3rd book, but I read the 1st book in this series in August of 2024, and I thought it was so good. But this book wasn't actually on my radar, even though everything about it sounds like it would be something that I would absolutely enjoy, and I did. But initially I DNF'd the 2nd book. So anyway, I'll come back to that actually. I rated this book 4 stars because I really, really enjoyed it. I love a good, solid, sapphic love story. I love the Japanese setting, especially as someone who's been to Tokyo. Like, it was so beautiful and so meticulous, and I love the details. I love learning about the fashion industry too. I think this book is so good. It reminds me of like I Love You So Mochi meets like a Bond Me for Two. I think this book is excellent. I love the characters, the romance, the queerness, everything. Like, this book is so good and it's so well done. I love a solid sapphic rom-com. So anyway, with that said, I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely highly, highly recommend it. The last book on this list, and definitely not the least, is called Love, Craves, Cardamom. And as I mentioned earlier, I initially DNF'd this book when it first came out, and I don't really remember why. But anyway, after finishing Love Makes Mochi, I decided to give this one a second chance, and I'm so glad I did, because this book is a YA contemporary following an Indian main character who basically finds out that the boy she's been secretly dating is an Indian prince. And I thought this book was so good and so well done. But first of all, my favorite aspect of this story was her relationship to art and activism and anti-colonialism. I think that part was definitely my favorite of the story, although I did really appreciate the romance itself, because again, these romances have been so cute, so well paced, so dreamy, and just so well done. All of these books would make such good rom-coms, like as movies. I'm trying to get into watching more rom-coms lately, honestly. But anyway, this book was so good and it was so well done. The romance, like I said before, was so cute and so giddy and just so well done. I love the characters and the plot and her relationships with her friends and everything. This book is so cute and it's so well done. Although, with that said, I would honestly say that this one was probably my least favorite of the three. But anyway, with that said, I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. I would definitely highly, highly recommend it. So in conclusion, first of all, please remember to check out Emmy's database. I think that Emmy is so hardworking and so friendly and so nice and so smart. And obviously I'm biased because we're friends, but also like I think that they're so nice and they've clearly put a lot of hard work into this database, which is why you should check it out to keep track of upcoming releases that you might be interested in. But also, like, just in general, there are so many backlisted queer book recommendations that I've recommended personally on my YouTube channel. So basically, all that to say, Emmy has very good taste. And not to say that they've read every single book on this database, but basically what I'm trying to say is that this database is for everyone, and I think that you could find something that you like through this database, which is why I think that it's so important. So anyway, in conclusion, I don't know if I really did a good job promoting that, but I hope that I did. So basically, if you enjoyed this video, please don't hesitate to give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below the rainbow emoji if you made it all the way to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you're new, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!